I see you found our little hiding spot in the universe. Don't get too comfortable. This is a place where you will find those with an experience that's out of this world, or possibly deep within your life. I welcome you to the Oracles with James Tyson. Lean forward and listen. We will pull you into a supernatural journey with guests from around the world, each one experiencing some of the most extraordinary phenomena this wee planet has to offer. Now, here are the Oracles with James Tyson.
Thank you, Liam, my favorite little alien you. And we're going to be talking about people like you. People like you? No, probably not people like you. Well, and thank you, listener, for tuning into this episode of the Oracles with James Tyson. It's me, James, and today I'm joined by my friend Philip Mantel, who is a British author, co-author, publicist, lecturer, broadcaster, and researcher of unidentified flying objects, whose interest really started back in 1979 when he joined the British UFO Research Association as well as the Yorkshire UFO Society, at which point he really didn't look back. He dug into the investigative side of things and just kept going. He is somebody who has been around ufology in the UK, as I said, since 1979, and has built himself a bit of an expertise in UK ufology. And I'm going to talk to him about it, some of the stuff that I've read, going back even right into the Second World War, where I have a bit of an interest in. But, you know, that's not the only thing I want to talk to him about. He's got a new book coming out, and I want to bounce some questions off that, because we are going to talk about one of the biggest hoaxes of the century, basically, and that's to do with the Roswell Alien Autopsy. Now, Philip is not only a researcher, but as I say, he's a writer. He has submitted articles in numerous ufological journals worldwide, newspaper, magazine articles. He's done lectures and it's been on radio and television broadcasts throughout the United Kingdom. He has been on international broadcasts from Norway, France, Germany, Austria, Romania, Switzerland, Israel, Japan, and into the US. And now we're going to drag him kicking and screaming out on a podcast that's originating here in Canada. Today, we are going to be talking about his latest book, Roswell Alien Autopsy, The Truth Behind the Film That Shocked the World. It's a revised edition, and it's got a lot more information in it. It contains over 600 pages of information, newspaper cutting, original letters and faxes, plus interview transcripts, photographs, and just a heck of a lot more. Much of this original material has never been published before. The Roswell Alien Autopsy is the definitive book on the so-called alien autopsy film that you've probably seen online or back in the day. I think Fox News had it all over the place. It's one of the most controversial pieces of film in the entire history of UFO research, and it was released publicly back in 1995 on TV and videos and newspapers, and probably all over the cover of things like The Globe and all those other tabloids that are out there. It's been seen around the world. The Roswell Alien Autopsy is the first and only book, to my knowledge, and to the author's knowledge, to deal with this film in its entirety. Actually, to begin with the details, who has seen what and what was made clear. We're going to talk about a guy named Ray Santilli, who's the owner of the film, and talk to him about stuff that's never been released into the public domain. Several other researchers from the UK and Europe, including Philip Mantel, have seen another autopsy film in the possession of Santini that is yet to be released. Their opening statements leave the reader in this book no doubt that there is more film available if only Santini would release it. Now, for the first time, the complete story of the film's release is detailed in this book by Philip, along with a selected commentary from national news media that covered it during its international release back in 95. We're going to talk about Spiros Malaras, who created the alien in the film. Ray Santini, we talk about Keith Bateman, all the other people that were involved in this. And it's in this revised edition of the book, it also looks into the highly controversial, back in the day, back in the day being last year, was an email that came forward that was both between, or is believed to have been between, Robert Bigelow, the billionaire who owned Skinwalker Ranch down in Utah, and it was started his own little space program, and Dr. Christopher Green, and we talk a little bit about that. That's really kind of where we're leading to. But in the first part, we're going to talk about a bunch of UFO sightings, and we're going to delve, because of Philip's experience as an investigator and many, many years in ufology in the UK. We're going to talk about a number of the UK incidents going back into the Second World War, maybe a little bit before that, and talking about some abductions in the UK and sightings, and kind of catching up on that country or that area's ufological experiences, which is kind of fun. We're actually going to talk a little bit about Calvin Parker, who was abducted back in 1973 with Charles Hickson. We bounce around a bit, but we are going to come back, and we were going to go in depth into, of course, the book that I want to talk about. It is the newest one, and you can find it on Amazon. Again, just go to, just look up Philip Mantel. Actually, probably Google Philip Mantel and the word Amazon, and it'll bring up all the books. But Roswell Alien Autopsy, The Truth Behind the Film That Shocked the World, the revised edition, is the one we're going to be talking about today. Philip, how are you today?
Hi, James. I'm very well, thank you. It's a lovely sunny day here in West Yorkshire, so I'm hunky-dory.
You're a small Ukrainian boat? A hunky-dory, get it? Anyway, it's okay here in the Pacific Northwest, the lower left Canadian coast. It's a little bit, the sun is trying to peek out. It's been drizzly here. We live in a rainforest, so that's kind of what happens here in the Commonwealth, over here in the colonies here. It is cool. It's actually been warm for March, but not too bad. So it's nice to hear that somebody's sitting in some sunshine somewhere. It's good. Now, Philip, you've been bouncing around doing this ufology investigation and collecting things together for quite a while. You have your own publishing company, Flying Disc Press, and my listener wants to go to flyingdiscpress.com. That's Flying Disc with a K, press.com, and you'll see a number of the books that Philip has published. A lot of the authors you recognize from being on this show, including my Brazilian friend Tiago Cichetti, who I interviewed just in the episode before this one. You've been doing this quite a while, and what exactly spurred your interest into the paranormal, the supernatural, and ufology itself? I noticed that even back in 1992, you were awarded honorary member of the Research Institute into Anomalous Phenomena. It's a science-based UFO study group based in Ukraine. Like, how you've been doing this a long time. Back in the 80s, you were poking around looking at UFOs. What got you off onto that tangent?
Yeah, I have been involved a long time, James. Thanks for reminding me. It makes me sound a bit ancient, but no. I mean, as a youngster, James, I was always interested in all things paranormal, mixed in with a bit of astronomy, the space program, a bit of science fiction. But the paranormal, for whatever reason, always fascinated me. I often think it might link back to my late mother. She was originally from Northern Ireland, and where they lived when she was a youngster was the middle of nowhere. Like I said, she had a 5-mile walk to school every morning and 5 miles back. They lived on a small farm. There's 5 children. My mum was 3 girls and 2 boys. And she told me the story of when she was, I don't know, 10 or 11 years old. She used to play down by the stream on the farm a lot. And she claimed she met a fairy, a female fairy, you know, with a pretty dress and wings. And she talked to this fairy. And the fairy gave her a little bottle to drink out of and said, if you drink this, you know, you'll never have an accident. And you know, she lived until she was 83. You don't recollect her having any accidents, you know, maybe apart from me, I don't know. But, you know, so that kind of got me interested. And I spoke to my mum about this, you know, down the years. And I said to her, you know, was it real, Mum? She said, well, it was real to me, you know, and she told my children, you know, her grandchildren about it. And I was fortunate, I think, because around this time, literally the other side of the road from us, my best friend at the time, his grandma lived there. And she used to go to the local spiritualist church. So I used to occasionally accompany her. And I found it, you know, fascinating, James. Although I didn't necessarily agree with what they were saying or doing or whatever, it nonetheless fascinated me. So my interest in all things paranormal, you know, grew from that. I would read as much as I could. I've always been an avid reader. My mum always surrounded us with books. And I left school at 16, high school, not really knowing what to do. Had a few different jobs. And then in late 1978, I went to work in West Germany. Couldn't speak the language, so I asked my mum to send me some books to read. And they were mainly UFOs and paranormal. But I'd read one book, I don't know what it was, don't know the title, but it had one chapter about UFOs, and that kind of got me interested. So I returned back home in, I think it was about April 1979, and one of my aunts, my Auntie Emily, used to live literally just round the corner from us, and she brought me the local evening newspaper. It's called the Evening Post. And it was printed in the city of Leeds, which was about 3 or 4 miles from where we lived. And there was an advertisement in it for the first meeting of the Yorkshire UFO Society, that coming Sunday. So I decided to go. Now, in those days in the UK, on a Sunday, everything closed. You know, there was very few buses running, public transport, but I managed to get the bus into Leeds and find this place. There was about 20 or 30 people at this meeting. It had been set up by brothers, Graham and Mark Birdsall. They were local gentlemen, and they put on a presentation, explained who they were. They'd already been involved in UFO research for a few years. Graham was a little bit older than me. Mark was the same age. And that got me hooked, James. You know, I thought, I just felt at home. And I was always the type of chap that wanted to know more. I wasn't content to read the books. You know, I'm the type of chap is if there was a button on a machine and it said don't press, I'd want to know what happened if I did press it, you know. So the meetings at the Yorkshire UFO Society were monthly, so I attended those for a number of months, just soaking in everything I could. There was a little bookstore there, so I could buy the literature that I was looking for. And I just became more and more fascinated. I joined the society, became a member, and you know, I think I was quite fortunate to be there at that time. And you know, I never looked back. That got me hooked, James. That's how I got involved.
Have you ever seen a UFO?
I've seen a couple of things. Nothing that you would call fantastic. Now, in the early to mid 1980s, in the north of our county of Yorkshire, there is the Yorkshire Dales National Park. And if you think of Wuthering Heights and things like that, it's that kind of terrain. For whatever reason, we had a lot of sightings in and around the market town of Skipton in the Yorkshire Dales National Park. And a lot of them managed to find their way to us somehow. So on occasion, we would hold organised sky watches in particular locations. Never saw anything. Now, Graham Birdsall, I remember, I think it was 1981, telephoned me one night and said, do you want to go onto the moors for an hour? said, okay, I didn't drive then, so Graham picked me up, off we went. Now, just outside of Skipton was an area, the little village called Carlton. The moor above it was called Carlton Moor, you know. There is no buildings on it, nothing. And we knew the location, so we're in a little lay-by at the side of the road. We just thought we'd spend an hour and we're chatting away. In the distance, it was pitch black. There was no moon. We saw this little light. And we knew there was no road there's no building. And so we decided to go and take a look, because beyond that location, down in the dip, was a little village. But you couldn't see it from the roadside. So we set off. Now, anyone that knew Graham knew that he, even in normal circumstances, James, he used to drive like a maniac, you know. So we're flying across the moor in the pitch dark, and Graham's going as fast as he could. And I don't know whether all the fields there are bordered by dry stone walls. I don't know whether one of the walls was down or there was an opening in the wall or whatever, but at one point I could see right down one of these little valleys, and hung in the sky was like a cartwheel of lights. You know, that's all I can describe it of. Just a massive circular lights, all different colours. And then it was gone because we were going at such a speed. And I told Graham, which all it did was make him angry and drive faster, you know, because he hadn't seen it. So we drove down into Lothersdale, this little village, and around, and there's a road that could circumnavigate that moor, and we did. Never saw anything. And Graham was, you know, we stayed there for another hour or so. Didn't see anything else. So that was one thing. And then we skipped forward in time, and this one was July the 23rd, 1984. And at this point, I worked in a factory in a little town called Morley, which is part of South Leeds. And I was working 10 o'clock that night, so I just finished work at 5 minutes early. And it used to be one long straight road all the way home, about 2 miles. It was a lovely summer's evening. It wasn't quite dark. It was a nice orange glow in the sky. And as soon as I came out onto the main road, I could see this light. I knew it shouldn't be there. So I took off. And the only thing between me and my destination was the motorway. You drove over the top of it. And I pulled in at a lay-by, and this light was still there. It was just hung there. So I took off again. And about a mile further down the road where I lived in a little place called Tingley, at my parents' house, and there's a big lay-by. I pulled in there. Now, the city of Leeds is in the valley below us. It's all lit up. And then there's a hill in the distance, and that's where Leeds Bradford Airport is. And then to the right, there's another hill, and that was the suburb of Middleton. And it was now two large lights hung above Middleton. You didn't have to, look up. You could see them straight in your line of sight. They were like an off-white, pearly white in colour. The one on the right, they were side by side, was slightly bigger than the one on the left. And I'm watching these things, and then they just went click, gone. They go up or down, left or right, they were just gone. As I got in the house, I phoned Mark Birdsall and told him, and the phone started ringing. So I grabbed my camera and my binoculars, went back out to the same location, stayed there for an hour or so, never saw anything else. So when I returned to work the following day, all my colleagues at work knew what I did in my spare time, and several of them have seen it going on either the same or similar route. And we had lots of people, contact us that evening. So what it was, I have no idea. We tried to find an explanation for it, but we failed. So those are the only two things that I personally have witnessed that I couldn't find an explanation for. Make of them what you will, James.
Oh yeah, and that's what I do. I kind of look at when I get information from somebody, I just kind of look at them and go, yeah, I take the information in. And as somebody who investigates things themselves, you do the same thing. You take the information in, process it, and say, okay, that's what the person says. And unless I can come up with a counter argument or not even an argument, but a counter that I could ask a question about, it is what it is. Now, you say you you're in kind of Yorkshire area. Is it West Yorkshire?
I'm in West Yorkshire. I live in just outside of the town of Pontefract.
You know where
West Yorkshire.
Todd Morton is?
I know Todmorden, yes.
Yeah, back in 1980, there was an on-duty police officer claimed to be abducted by an alien spacecraft in Todmorden, claiming it was a luminescent object had been spotted by other police officers about the same time. You know much about that, or do you recall?
Yeah, absolutely. That was a gentleman by the name of Alan Godfrey.
Yes.
And I've met Alan several times and communicated with him, and Alan published his own book last year. I can't remember the title of it, but his family wrote his own book. Alan was on duty that night. He was in a patrol car on his own, and he was working night shift. And he'd actually been looking for some cows that had gone missing, believe it or not, and he couldn't find them. And there'd been a bit of rain during the night, so he'd been in the centre of Todmorden. It's only a little market town, and he'd spoken to an officer on foot patrol, and he decided to take one last look for these cows before he finished his shift. So he's going up, the main road through Todmorden, and there's a large mill up ahead, and he first thought, he saw this light and he thought, oh, it's a bus. And as he got closer, he realised it wasn't a bus. It was an object that was literally blocking the road in front of him. Bearing in mind, he's still in his patrol car. And it had like a bank of panels across the top. And the bottom half was dark, and that was spinning. The bottom part was spinning. And it literally blocked the road. He couldn't get past this. So he decided to get on the radio to the police station in Todmorden. He couldn't get through, which Alan had said that wasn't unusual because Todmorden is surrounded by hills and what have you. So sometimes the reception was pretty poor. So he decided to take out his police notebook and draw this thing, which he did. The next thing he remembers, he's several hundred yards further down the road, now driving the patrol car. No recollection of starting it up and driving off. Looked behind him and this thing had gone, so he turned around and he reckoned that the place where it had been on the road was now dry. Bearing in mind it had been raining that night, so there was a dry spot on the road. When he got back to the police station, he was late. He couldn't understand why he was late because this had only happened, a minute. It wasn't a long sighting. He also noticed that his police boot was split and he got a little burn on the inside of his foot. Couldn't understand that. And the following day, Alan actually asked permission to put in a report. He wrote a report about this, and that was sent off to wherever. Unknown to PC Godfrey, on the moors above Todmorden on the same night were 3 other police officers. The reason they were out on the moors, they were looking for stolen motorcycles. Apparently it's a place where they go and joyride around on the motorbike and then dump it on the moor. And they actually saw an object, believe it or not, a blue light in the sky heading towards Todmorden. Alan was totally unaware of this, although he knew the officers, he didn't know at the time that what they'd seen. Some months later, Alan was still plagued by this point missing time. And cutting a long story short, James, he went under regressive hypnosis, which was filmed on video at the time, and he reported a close encounter. He claims he saw these small creatures, these ugly things. He's put on a table, and when you first see the video, for example, Alan sees this thing on the road, and he throws his hands across his eyes in anguish, and he talks about this big bright light. Now, I know you said you were a police officer, but Alan was the type of police officer that you simply wouldn't have wanted to encounter if you were doing anything wrong. How can I put it that way? He was no nonsense, and he still is. He's that type of fella. I've talked to Alan about his encounter, and he still stands by it. And he said, Philip, if I had had a stone or a brick, I could have thrown it at that thing. I was that close, and it would have gone clunk. As for the hypnosis, he just says, make of it what you will. But that thing was there in the road. He's no doubt about it. And So that's Alan Godfrey's tale. What is interesting about the Alan Godfrey story, I'm not sure many of your listeners will actually know this, but they may be familiar with the movie that came out in the early 1990s called Fire in the Sky.
Oh, yeah. Yes, I am.
This is based on the Travis Walton encounter.
Yeah, I know Travis. I've talked to him numerous times.
The producers of that movie actually came and talked to Alan Godfrey. And Alan Godfrey's story was in the running along with Travis Walton's encounter to be made into a movie. It was a toss-up between the two. And they actually made a little pilot about Alan's encounter. It wasn't shown anywhere. It was just for their own amusement, if you like. Unfortunately, they didn't go with Alan's encounter. They went with Travis Walton instead. So, there you go.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Travis Walton and the original, like the Fire in the Sky movie, there's a lot of artistic license, let's say, taken in that one. And he admits, he rolls his eyes when he talks about that. But there's a new Fire in the Sky. There's a newer production, I believe, coming out.
Yeah. I mean, I've met Travis myself, and he explained why they changed certain things.
Yeah.
But I just thought I'd let you know that particular encounter, Alan Godfrey's, was in the melting pot to be made into a movie.
That's fascinating. I recall there was another abduction in the UK, but this was, I would say decades earlier. It's back in the Second World War. There was a fellow, he was a guard at one of the radar towers, radar installations, about Albert Lancaster.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Do you know a little bit about that story too?
I know of it, but I can't recall the details. But there was a gentleman I spoke to. Not so much an abduction account, but this was 1942, just outside of London. He was based, and. I forget his name offhand, but I have interviewed him. And he'd been to a local dance, and he was late. So he had to walk back to his base. And he said, I'm walking back, and I'm not far off the base, and there's an object in the side of the field it's shaped a bit like what he called a bell tent, but it's glowing. And he says there is this creature stood next to it, and it's got some kind of device on its chest, like a box, that's shining a light up into its face, and it's just stood there, didn't move, and it frightened the living daylights out of him. When he got back to the base, he had to get his friend to let him in through the window, otherwise he was in big trouble.
Yeah.
So there were encounters, like you said, with Albert Lancaster and this gentleman that did happen during the wartime. And, we all assume that the modern day of UFO research began with Kenneth Arnold in 1947, of course. Well, that's fair enough, but other things have cropped up prior to that, and that is just one of them.
Yeah, there was a lady called Eileen Arnold in 1942 who had something come over top of her in a town while she was walking down the street, and described it as a big kind of silver disky oval object moving slowly above her. And the same with the guy in actually Albert Lancaster in 1942. He was in Northumbria at he was guarding a radar site near there, and he just assumed it was some British weapon or German weapon, because at the time it was right in the heart of Second World War. Each of them report afterwards that they had some kind of psychic power or psychic ability for either continued or a short time after. In your interviews with people, have you run into that too? If they've had an encounter, all of a sudden they seem to be a little more in tuned with things, or what they may describe as psychic? Absolutely,
James. Absolutely. I mean, I was nodding my head as you were talking there. In the late 80s, early 90s, my colleagues and I set up a UFO hotline, which was basically just an answer phone. And through that, the very first call on it was actually from a local lady who turned out to be an abductee. So that kind of got me, interested in the abduction side of things. And in 1994, I co-authored my first book called Without Consent. And Without Consent deals only with abduction accounts and missing time cases from the UK, nowhere else, just the UK. And I literally travelled from one end of the country to the other, to Scotland, to Wales, interviewing people for the book. Some didn't make it into the book for whatever reason. But there was a number of them, by no means all of them. There was a number of them of what I call had side effects that they put down as a result of the encounter. And for example, one lady was called Elsie Wilkinson from Northampton, and she became a spiritual healer, and Elsie was convinced it was as a result of her encounter. And I interviewed another chap called David out in Wales. David was only a young man when this happened. He had long hair, denim jacket, that kind of thing. And David he used to write spontaneous poetry. And he swore me, don't you let my friends know about this, because me writing. But he said, again, it all happened as a result of his encounter. A number of them became interested in what we now call, green or environmental issues. One chap whom I interviewed called John Day. John at the time, although he was a carpenter, John went on to make the most beautiful dolls' houses you've ever seen. It's almost as if his skills were enhanced somewhat, So there was a number of the abductees that I call had side effects from their experience, and some of that was of an artistic, some of an environmental nature, or a psychic nature, like Elsie. And it was a curious aspect that I didn't expect to find when I was interviewing these people. I didn't know what I was going to find, to be honest, but I certainly didn't think of anything like that. So, I would love if it had been possible to do more research, not just into the abductee, but the what I call the side effects. And I think that's a particular part of the abduction phenomena that hasn't really been looked at in any detail, James. So the answer to your question is yes, I have come across that and several times, yes.
Yeah, I find it fascinating, and you're right. People on the first glance will say, "Okay, what did the UFO look like? What did you see? Not what did you feel?" And after you come away with it, other than the stress and the concern that no one's believing you, is how has it affected your dreams? How has it affected your interaction with other people? And I think nowadays, in hindsight, we can go back and say, I had the ability to, I had a lot of, I easily could not really tell the future, but I had premonitions that ended up being really true. And, again, we look at things like that over time through hindsight, and we have words for them now, or maybe back, in the 1940s, you didn't want to come out and say, well, I have psychic experiences, or I have a better connection with something, or not even, like you say, people may be a little more earth conscious, a little more green. They may not have connected that to the abduction or the incident itself, but in hindsight, we can go back and start putting those pieces together, and I find it absolutely fascinating. One of the things I always focus on, a lot of the stuff, especially in the UK or in Europe, that happened during the Second World War, and I don't mean just all the Foo Fighters and things like that. which are kind of commonly talked about. My father was a gunner in a B-25 Mitchell in Stanton Morley on the other side of the UK. And he flew out of there, and his squadron was posted there, and Hartford Bridge. I don't know if we're exactly where that is, in Hartford Bridge in the UK, but that's right in the center south, I believe. But he was posted there. So anything to do with the Second World War and UFOs was always of interest to me, just because my dad lived in the UK during the Second World War. And there was a time that there had been a UFO, and I'm just going to double check to see if you had anything to add to this. Well, back in the day, Winston Churchill actually banned reporting for 50 years of one UFO incident because he was afraid it would create mass panic. And it was actually a witness that came forward years later saying he was there when Churchill and Eisenhower discussed how to deal with that encounter. And it was, it basically was over the English coastline and intercepted by, the plane was intercepted by a strange metallic object that matched the aircraft's course and speed, and sped up and slowed down, and the entire crew of the plane reported to have photographed the object. Well, not the entire crew, but somebody photographed it, and it basically paced the plane. Do you have any information about that incident, or the actual Churchill coming out and saying, "Look, we're not going to talk about this"?
Yeah, I think there's a number of documents in the Public Records Office now that were originally held under the Official Secrets Act, and one of the first documents that they ever released is called the Churchill Memo, and it's just asking just Winston Spencer Churchill, what's all this thing about UFOs? Let me have your, an answer at your convenience, or whatever. Words to that effect. Okay. But going back further than that, it is alleged that Churchill at some point, I think we're going back now to the First World War, used the sightings of what were classed as the mystery airships, which were basically lights, but they were the mystery airships. He actually used that as a way of actually getting more funding for the military, because he was saying that this could be a secret German weapon, and it's highly likely that is correct, that he used these mystery scareship stories, as they become to be known, as an internal propaganda, if you like, in order to get further funding. But the Churchill story you're talking about is well known. I can't add anything more to it. But, virtually all the documents are now in the Public Records Office in Kew. And like I said, one of the very first ones to be released was signed by Winston Spencer Churchill. So, I have a copy of it here somewhere. So there you go.
Oh, you probably have a copy of everything somewhere with all your research. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about is your latest book, where you've kind of added a lot more to a book you had out earlier. It's the Alien Autopsy film.
Yes.
Tell my listener a little bit, first of all, what the Alien Autopsy film is, and about your new book.
Yeah, I mean, for those that are not aware, in 1995, a London businessman by the name of Ray Santilli released a film that he claimed was one of the creatures, one of the aliens at Roswell being autopsied. And along with that piece of film was some debris footage, which was allegedly some of the wreckage found at Roswell back in 1947. Now, it was shown on Fox in the United States in August, and it went around the world, James. It was a sensation, make no bones about it, extremely controversial. Santilli's main area of business was music, nothing to do with this. He was kind of chap who would license, you know, if you were a musician, and maybe license your back catalogue, or he would have some of the old 60s pop groups reform and re-record some of their hits. And I had an office in Balcombe Street in London. Now, in 1993, I was the press officer for the British UFO Research Association, amongst other things. And I had a letter from a company called the Merlin Group asking if we would be able to assist them in making a UFO documentary. And it was signed by Ray Santilli. So we exchanged, you know, pleasantries, sent him some information, explained to him what we could and couldn't do. Had a few conversations with him on the telephone and a few faxes. And then out of the blue, he said, Philip, I actually have film of the UFO crash at Roswell in 1947. So the obvious question to ask is, can I see it? Show me. So the conversation went, yes, I can, no, I can't, yes, I can, no, I can't. Anyway, I met Ray for the first time in London. We are actually hosting an evening with Travis Walton and Mike Rogers. They were in town promoting the movie Fire in the Sky. I'd been hired to help promote it, so I organised an evening lecture and a press conference for them in London. Met both Travis and Mike and their respective wives for the first time. And I invited Ray along because his office wasn't far away. And I met him, and he told me, he said he'd been out in the States in 1993 in Cleveland, Ohio, looking to buy either film or photographs of the early rock and roll stars before they were famous. And he said he met an old boy, he bought a piece of Elvis footage from him that was out of copyright, paid him cash, thank you very much. And he said this old chap came back to him before he came home, and he said, if you think that's good, before I was a freelance cameraman, I was in the military. And in 1947, I filmed the crash at Roswell, etc., etc. I sent most of the film back, but there was a few reels of film that needed some special processing. And I kept that, and nobody came for it. So I just stored it away. And now I need some money. I think it was his granddaughter's wedding. So Ray claimed he went up to his house, they put it on a projector, showed it to him, he phoned Kodak, because there was an edge code on this film, and they said, yeah, it's 1940, and that was it. He shook hands on a deal, and the deal was not to release his name and so on. So again, I just said, well, yeah, a fascinating story, but that's all it is, show me. So, yes, I can, no, I can't. So in the end, I said, look, you know, it's a fairy story, I don't believe you. So we jumped forward in time to early 1995, and a video arrived at my house. It was a video that had been sent to us for review, and it was Roswell the movie. It was made by Paul Davids. It was only a small release in this country on video by Sony, and it kind of reminded me of Ray Santilli. I'd still got his business card. I thought, I wonder if he still claims to have that footage. So I rang him up out of the blue. And he says, yes, Philip, I do have it, but you don't believe me. So I said, show me. So he said, okay, speak to my secretary, book a date, and come on down. So my wife and I went down to see him. He showed us the film, so we could actually confirm that film did exist. And over the following weeks, he showed us more and more. So I asked him what his intention was to do with this film. And at that point, his intention was to make his own little documentary on video and sell it. You know, you buy it in your high street, you know, you buy it online, mail order or whatever. And I was also at that point Bufora's conference organizer, and I had a conference already organized for the coming August of 1995. So I thought to myself, you know, this film needs to get out into the public domain. That's the only way we'll find out anything about it. So on the spot, I just said to Santilli, will you show it at our conference? He says, yeah. So we shook hands, and that was it. There was no money involved, no contract. The story eventually leaked out by mistake, by accident, and it went around the world. And like I said then, the television became involved, and they sold the film to a variety of broadcasters. Before any of those saw it on TV, he actually turned up at our conference in late August 1995 and showed the film. It was highly controversial, but we had people arrive from around the world to watch it, and out it went. So what I decided to do, I got to know Ray fairly well and the type of character he was. And if you confronted him, he just wouldn't talk to you anymore. He'd just cut you off. He made it quite clear this was his film and he was going to do what he wanted with it, which is, in my eyes, was fair enough. I'd achieved my goal of getting it out into the public. I mean, it was on Fox. It was so popular on Fox, they ran 2 other shows about it. So I decided in public and in private with Ray, I would support him. I would say, you tell him, Ray, you do this, you do that. But behind the scenes, I tried to figure out what was going on. It took me a long time, James, and I mean an awful long time. I mean, I expected when it went out on television that people would come forward and say, yeah, it's me, I'm one of the actors. Or, no, my grandfather told me about this film, it's the same, None of that happened. It just went dead. People were arguing about it, yeah. But so slowly but surely, I just kept on at it. Cutting a long story short, I eventually got to the bottom of it. It did turn out to be a fake. The man behind it was a chap called Spiros Malaris. Spiros, by profession, was a filmmaker. He's also a magician. He served his apprentice as a mechanic, as a young man. So he's got a lot of strings to his bow. One of his best friends at the time was a sculptor, Royal Academy trained sculptor by the name of John Humphreys. So they put a little team together. It's a long story. He bumped into Santilli by accident. Santilli told him the story. And he said, well, I can make you an alien autopsy film. The only difference is with Spiros, he said that we didn't make it to make any money. The idea was to make it, release it, and then at 6 or 9 months down the line, have an unveiling, a ta-da moment, and own up to it and tell everybody how they made it, how they fooled people, in the hope that his little film business would get some more business and that the sculptor would get some more business. But he said Santilli kept telling him, different stories about not making any money, so he just let it go. And so a few years back, I published a book called Roswell Alien Autopsy. But this year, with it being the 25th anniversary, I decided to update it because, a lot of the early research, James, was done in the old-fashioned way, in paper format. And I literally have a filing cabinet here with all my research in it. So I made the book into a large 8x10 format and added some new material, but put a lot of these documents in, correspondence between me and Santilli and full transcripts of interviews with people and photographs of them. So it's more now of a research document than it's ever been. And not only do I refer to the documents, you can see them in yourself, they're there. And so I let that go at the beginning of this year to coincide with the 25th anniversary. And I was frustrated. We're all frustrated in this lockdown. I've actually made a documentary series with a company in London based on my book. And at the moment, it's 4 parts. We were just in the process of putting the 5th part together, and I was going to go back down to London to film it when we ended up in lockdown. So when we'll ever get part 5 finished and it will be released, I couldn't honestly tell you. But the whole series is actually based, on my research and my book. And I've seen the 4 parts. I'm very pleased with it. I would have just, if we could have got part 5 done and finished, then they could have released it online. But so that kind of brings it all up to date, James. It was a highly controversial story. It became personal for me because in the early days, I'll give you an example. My wife and I were having an extension built on our house. So people were saying, well, where's Philip Mantel getting the money for that? It must come from Santilli. He hasn't got that kind of money. Well, they were right, I didn't, but my wife did. She'd had her own property prior to us meeting, and she sold it, and we used some of the money to build an extension. I was accused of being Santilli's accomplice and all kinds of crazy things, none of which was remotely true. And Santilli had supposedly paid me a packet of money, which wasn't true. He paid me a small fee because I did work on he did make a documentary, and I worked on that for him. I even wrote it. And it's narrated by a famous UK actor called Brian Blessed. And so I got paid a fee for doing that, which I would have done for any video company, So I was determined, it became personal, I was determined to get to the bottom of it. I just didn't think it'd take as long as it did. But everything's in the book, from the beginning of how it all began, who saw what, because what a lot of people are not aware of, James, they may have seen the Alien Autopsy film either on television or online, YouTube, wherever, but there are in fact two separate autopsy films. Only one has been released, and I've seen them both. Now, the other one runs a little bit longer. They do a similar medical procedure, although it is different. The creature on the slab is the same, apart from it has no injuries, no burnt leg with a hole in it. And like I say, they do a different medical procedure. It doesn't go out of focus as much because the camera doesn't go so close. And of course, Santilli claims that the film is a restoration. Well, if it's a restoration, why do you need two different films?
Yeah.
Doesn't make any sense. Now, I'm not the only one to see both films. So at the beginning of the book is like a who saw what. A number of colleagues also saw the other film, so I get them to go on the record. And I've put this point to Santilli, if it was a restoration, right, why do you have two different ones? I mean, if I was hired to restore the Mona Lisa, for example, I wouldn't make an extra one and just, by the way, make it a little bit different. Perhaps I'd give it a big cheesy smile instead of that little one, and maybe do blonde hair instead of dark hair. You just, there's no sense to it whatsoever. So for the series that we've just made, Ray is interviewed, and he's now trying to shy away from the fact that there are two autopsy films, because if there are two different ones, it cannot be a restoration. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So, I keep forgetting to mention that myself, but there are two separate autopsy films. Now, of course, what Spiros will tell you, the reason why there is two is the one that's not being released is that they realised when they'd done it that they made a mistake with the medical procedure. And had that been released, it would instantly have been known it was a fake, because of whatever they did medically was totally wrong. So they still had the mold. They put another lot of whatever it is, they made this thing out of him. Next day, there was still a fault with it. It had got an air pocket in the leg. So they improvised. They went to the butcher's, got some bones, stuck that in, burnt it to look like it was an injury, and improvised. And it turned out all right. And that's the one that everyone's seen on television. But the other one has a major medical mistake on it that you would not do during an autopsy. I don't recollect what that mistake is. I'm not medically qualified, and I only ever saw the film once. But Santilli's trying to hide the fact that there are two films, because it does away with these restoration hocus pocus, flim flam. Okay. So there you go. Yeah.
So you would, and my police brain here obviously is like, so the Ray Santilli film is a fake?
Absolutely, it's 100% fake. There isn't one film. There's actually 5 films in all. What we start off with is the first thing that Ray Santilli showed anyone is a piece of film called the tent footage. He claimed that this was the creature examined in a like a field tent on site before it was shipped to wherever. It's very dark. there is a creature on the slab, but it's covered with a blanket. You see the head and the hands and the feet. There's two men in white coats beyond it, and a man walks in front of the camera every now and again. The camera's static, it doesn't move, there's no sound. And you can see they've got a kind of a knife in their hand, and they've got some fleshy material. And it runs for about, 8 to 10 minutes. Santilli even gave me a copy of that. I have it still here on VHS. James, can't play it now, because don't have a VHS player. However, this film was made by some colleagues of Ray. What they used, this is how the whole Alien Autopsy film started. They used to have little fun brainstorming sessions. And during one of these sessions, Santilli claimed he'd been to Roswell. And he said, wouldn't it be great if we had some Roswell film? Just so happened that this company, which was called AK Music, and the owner was a chap called Keith Bateman. One of his colleagues actually he's called Philip Yarman, and I've interviewed Philip, was reading a UFO book at the time, and it had a few pages about Roswell in it. So Keith went off and made the tent footage in a barn in Bedfordshire. And the man you see with his back towards the camera is actually the farmer. And one of the guys in white coats is one of his colleagues that worked for him. So he took this to Ray Santilli and said, here you go, I've met you. And Ray said, no, that's not good enough quality. Go away and get me a budget for another one. So he did. And Ray said, no, that's too much. And that was it. But Ray kept the tent footage, knowing full well that it was fake. And that's how the idea then germinated. He made up this story about this cameraman. And like I say, he bumped into Spiros Malaris at a television festival in Cannes, in France. Told him this fantastic story. Spiros met up with him again back in London. And he showed him the tent footage. Ray claimed that this was authentic and he paid a lot of money for it. And Spiros says, well, that's never seen film. That's been shot on video. You've been had. He didn't really believe the story. So off he went. And as he's driving away, Spiros and all of them really have got, the one thing they all have in common is they have this wicked sense of humour, And Spiros thought, I can make him some alien autopsy film. My best friend's, an academy-trained sculptor. We can do it. So I went back to Ray with the proposition, and he said, yeah. And that's how it all began, And it was actually filmed in Spiros' sister's apartment in London because she was having it renovated. So they made and built the set in the apartment. It didn't matter how much mess they made because it was being renovated anyway. And Spiros' girlfriend at the time assisted, as did his brother. And one of the little funny things about this, they'd actually filmed the autopsy. Okay, so the creature's on the slab. It's all been cut open. There's giblets and brains everywhere, and they left it. And off they went. And when they come back to the apartment the next morning, it had actually been burgled. The door was open. And they're thinking, we've been had, somebody. But he said, can you imagine the face of the burglar when he opened the door and looked into the room, and there's this thing, on the slab, chopped open, And, I've been to Spiros' house, and he's shown me all his material, all his research material. So it's not just a story he can offer. He can support his story with documented evidence, James. He has his diaries from the time. He had faxes from Kodak telling him what the edge codes were and things like that. He had a huge portfolio of US military trucks. So what do you want that for? He said, well, we were going to take it one step further, because in the early days, someone said to Ray Santilli, what convinced you the film was real? And he said, you can see President Truman on it so clearly that you can read his lips. Now, Truman's not seen anywhere, but Spiros said we were going to film a little clip of President Truman. I was going to get somebody with the prosthetics to do his face. And in the background, he said I was going to have a little crash saucer scene. And he'd even got a disused go-kart stadium where he was going to build this set. And part of the set would have been the back end of a US military truck, but he would have built it out of balsa wood, but it would have looked real. And he said, I was actually going to use one of the number plates off one of the real trucks. That's why he got this stack of pictures. He was looking for a number plate. And he said, I was going to use this particular number plate. Therefore, if you went back and searched the archives, if they kept such things, for this military number plate, it would be found to be authentic. Hence the pile of photographs of US military trucks. But he said, in the end, we ran out of money. We didn't have enough money or time as well to make the Truman film, as he said. So you have 5 films. You have, excuse me, you have the so-called tent footage made by Keith Bateman. Keith's on the record. I've interviewed him. The original film was actually in colour. They turned it to black and white, and there's a colour scene of it in the documentary I've made. But it's then the 2 separate and different alien autopsy films, one of which has only been seen on TV. There's then the debris film, where Ray holds up these big I-beams with lettering on it, panels. The lettering is part Greek. The reason for that is because Spiros Malaris is from Greek heritage. His parents are Cypriots. So he speaks and writes Greek anyway. And then what a lot of people don't know is that Ray Santilli was put under a lot of pressure to provide something from his mysterious cameraman. And part of that was, he said, he set up an interview with him. So what he claimed to have done is sat the cameraman down in front of a camera, give him a list of questions, which I think were put together by the gentleman who produced Alien Autopsy, Fact or Fiction in the States, Bob Kiviat, and the cameraman just answers these questions to the camera. Now, it's filmed on video, and it's quite dark, and he's got glasses on and what have you, but, of course, because it's filmed on video, when you play it, all you do is turn the contrast up, and it just brightens it. It turns out this was an old out-of-work actor that Spiros found in Los Angeles. And he put him a fake nose on, I think, paid him some money, cleaned him up a bit, and paid for his hotel for the night. And he is an actor, and we even know his name, and we have a couple of clips from some of the movies with him, movies you've never heard of, James, So there are, when it comes to the alien autopsy, there are, in fact, 5 different and separate films, each and every one of which is a hoax.
Well, that's fascinating. In your new book, or in the rewrite of the book, The Alien Autopsy, you actually added in a bit of a controversial 2019 email in regards to U.S. billionaire Robert Bigelow and Dr. Christopher Green. What is that about? What was that email?
Out of the blue, I think it was around June time of last year, I got a tip-off out of the blue. I don't know who tipped me off, and I was sent this. It's an email thread. It's 11 pages long. And as you said, the main respondent of this email is Bigelow, the US billionaire. But other people are copied in. And it's basically a chap called Eric Davis and Hal Puthoff, Dr. Hal Puthoff are in there as well, questioning a gentleman by the name of Dr. Christopher Green. He's known as Kit Green. And they all worked for Bigelow's organization. The date on this goes back to 2001. And Bigelow set up an organization called the National Institute of Discovery Science. And one of the guys that ran it was Dr. Colm Kelleher as well. So all these people are copied in, and they're basically clarifying some comments made by Dr. Green. And Dr. Kit Green, for those that are not aware, he used to work for the CIA at one point. And he was on what they called their weird desk. On occasion, if they got anything weird and wonderful, he would deal with it. But he's a medical doctor. still practices, I believe, PhD as well. And in this email thread, Kit Green claimed that back in 1987/88, at the Pentagon, a briefing he went to at the Pentagon, he was shown a film that was exactly the same as the Alien Autopsy film released by Ray Santilli. We then jump forward in time. I was contacted at some point by Colm Kelleher and put him in touch with Ray Santilli, who provided them with a Betacam copy of the film and allegedly some clips, some actual celluloid for examination. And so I'm actually mentioned, in this email thread. Then Kit Green, it specifies why he believes that Ray Santilli's film is real. And he's talking about it as a medical doctor. He also makes a comment about speaking with Santilli's PR team and speaks about them in a quite a disparaging way, and that is the essence of this email thread. So he's saying that the Alien Autopsy film is in fact real, and they ask him point blank, and he spells it out in capital letters, real. So this and another email thread about something different but relating to UFOs, nothing to do with the Alien Autopsy, made quite a stir. So I eventually got hold of one of those that is copied in on this email thread. I won't mention his name, but I asked him, and he said, yeah, first off, is this email thread real? It's not a fake, is it? No, it was authentic. He went on to point out that they'd now changed their minds and they believed that the Alien Autopsy film was fake. After quite a while, I also managed to track down Dr. Green and get a statement from him as well. Now, he was also interviewed by Richard Dolan, and he changed his story a little bit, saying that sections of the film he was shown in 1988 or 87 were the same as the Ray Santilli film. Not the whole film, but parts of it. Well, whether it was the whole film or parts of it, they cannot have been the same as shown in 1995 by Ray Santilli, because it wasn't even dreamt up. It wasn't even designed and made until 1995. So, it cannot be the same. So that sparked a whole new level of interest in the Alien Autopsy film. I mean, there are people still today, James, believe it to be authentic. And no matter what I say or what Spiros says or what Ray Santilli could, swear on his children's life that it was a fake, and they would still say he's been paid off to say that, for some crazy reason, because Ray did change his story. He originally said, what you see is the real film, and that is all of it. And then he made a movie in 2006, and that's when he changed his story. He said, well, it's not all real, it's a restoration. He said the film deteriorated, which is nonsense. Why would it spend 50 years in a gentleman's attic and be fine, and then you ship it to London and it deteriorates? Doesn't make any sense at all. Plus, experts will tell you about the type of film they use and all this lot. It wouldn't deteriorate, So, but there are those that still believe it. And even Santilli popped up last year and said, I told you there'd be documents that prove my film is real. Well, these are not documents. It's just an email thread. Yes, everybody on it, apart from people who are all doctors of some kind or other, and these are their opinions. It's not proof of anything. And I've tried to explain that even though you may be a PhD and an MD, you do have a belief system, and that at times can overrule any kinds of logic at all. And just because someone is extremely intelligent and have got a list of degrees and what I mean, doesn't mean anything. I mean, I worked in a factory for most of my life, James, and we had a PhD in the factory, a lovely guy, Dr. John, an extremely intelligent man. I mean, he was a PhD in chemistry, I believe, But you ask him what time of day it was, and he wouldn't have a clue, So just because you know, but anyway, he kicked off a whole new level of interest, and the email thread is in there, and what Kit Green had said, and so on. So it kind of brought it up to date, and I'm it's one of those stories that no matter how much you'd like it to go away, it won't. It refuses to die. It's a bit like Rasputin. You can poison him, shoot him, kill him, stab him, throw him out the window, and he's still alive. You know what I mean? That's the alien autopsy for you.
Yeah, and it comes down to it that it's faked. It was fake. These are the reasons why. Mm-hmm. This is the evidence that it is fake. And then if you've got the Bob Bigelow and Dr. Green conversation, all they're doing is kind of asking questions back and forth, and they're not. You can be a doctor and look at something and say, okay, I think that's real. Mm. But if you don't question it and you don't dig further into it like you did, and like some of the other investigators did, and ask the right questions to the right people, you're not going to get anywhere. And again, like you say, your belief system may shroud where your line of questioning is going to go. As an investigator, mm-hmm. you want to take your belief system and put it on the shelf and just stick to the pure version statement and then analyze what the answers are, but not based on a prejudice. And as soon as you involve that prejudice into your interrogation, here's me being my policeman again, the line of questioning, you're going to taint it. Mm. And that's what I see happens with, if Ray comes up saying, oh, look, I've got this, I've got documents. Well, no, a thread of emails isn't, quote unquote, documentation.
Yeah, well, see, Santilli's never provided anything. There's the film. I mean, he claimed when he met the cameraman showed him his discharge papers, photographs of him in uniform, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, well, it was supposed to be an old man then. Here we are 25 years later. Unless he's lived to be the world's oldest man, it would be deceased by now. So there would be no reason why you couldn't release his name, and you could double check his military records and that kind of thing, because Ray made up this story about him. So if such a man did exist and they didn't match Ray's, his military record didn't match Ray's story, he said he was at the atomic bomb blast and he did this and he did that, So everybody who was involved in those things is known about and is in the archives, but of course there's nothing coming from Santilli, nothing whatsoever. Whereas when you speak to Spiros and say, well, can you back up what your claims are? Yeah, here I am. Here's my diaries from the time. Meeting with Ray, is the sketches I did. I mean, Spiros himself is quite a good artist, James, and he's involved in various art projects as one of his sidelines or his interests. And he actually did a storyboard. He painted a storyboard. And these weren't little drawings. These were all quite large. He's got about 20 of them. Because what he did, he made the storyboard to sort of based on Ray's fictional account of the cameraman and the film. And I've got pictures of them. We have a picture of John Humphreys, the sculptor, with one of the casts of the dummies in the background. This is a little Polaroid. Other items as well. So not only does he have a story to tell, he can support most of what he's saying, with documentary material, whereas Santilli can't provide anything, nothing. No, I mean, let's assume, that Santilli's story was authentic, James. You could have the most fantastic piece of film in the entire history of cinematography, and if you had that film authenticated, its value would increase exponentially. I mean, it would be priceless. But no, Ray's a businessman. He didn't do any of that. it's like, was it last year that somebody had a painting for, I don't know, 40 or 50 years, and they were convinced it was one of the lost works by Leonardo da Vinci, and of course they finally proved it was, and it went from being worth nothing to being, tens of millions, maybe even hundreds of millions, So it doesn't make any sense, as a businessman, he would have known the worth of having the film properly authenticated. He lived in Hertfordshire, in England. That is where Kodak UK are based. I spoke with Kodak personally. They were more than willing to analyse it. They would not comment what the film depicted, but they would be able to analyse it and tell you, its age, etc. Just near where Kodak are, we also have the British Film Institute. Kodak said we can get them involved as well because they are experts in preserving old film,
Yeah.
All of this was free. They weren't charging any fee for it. Sam Tilly could have literally driven from his house to Kodak and handed it over in person. Did he do any of that? No. He played the flim-flam game instead. So, but all of it is there pretty much in my book. If anybody is remotely interested anymore, it's all there. And it's Roswell Alien Autopsy. You'll find it on Amazon.
And that's where you're going to go to check out all your books, actually. If you go to Roswell Alien Autopsy, Philip Mantel, you can find it, then, of course, get on Amazon and just click on the name Philip Mantel as his author, and you'll pop up all his other books. The other place you want to go look at Philip Mantel's work and the other books that he's publishing is flyingdiscpress.com. Flyingdiscpress.com is disc with a K, and you'll get all the other books that are coming out, and, well, not coming out, that have come out, and keep track of some of the work that you are doing. Actually, I have one of your authors coming up in the next little while, and we're going to talk about the Best of Project Blue Book. Kevin Randall's going to be coming on, and again, he's one of the authors that you publish on Flying Disc Press. It's very, very interesting, this whole hoax, the building of it, and when you've got somebody like Spiros Malaris, who, in what you've described, he should be writing novels, like very, very detailed. His attention to detail is fantastic.
Well, I think it pretty much has to be in his line of work, because he said originally, his mum and dad were the old-fashioned kind. Get a proper job, get a proper job. So he trained as a mechanic, but at the same time he was a part-time filmmaker and a magician. And again, as a filmmaker, at times you have to be pretty precise. But as a magician, you certainly have to do, because if you're not, the trick you're trying to do won't come off, So eventually the filmmaking and the magical side, the magician side of things, took over, and he left, the trade behind. But he does have a trained mechanic. He also, when I first met him, and his partner ran a TV studio, Waterfall Studios in London. So this was a studio for hire. He did a lot of work with the BBC. So he's done a number of things, and he's a businessman. I mean, one of the things, for example, him and his business partner have been doing now is they will hire a theatre, and they'll have a special guest. They'll have an evening with so-and-so. For example, one of the guests they had last year was none other than Sophia Loren. Live. I mean, live on the stage, and you pay to go and listen to her life story and chat with her, and so that's just one of. And he's involved in various art projects. He runs his own charity. It's called Bags of Love, and basically what he does, he takes donations, and this is for the homeless, but not the long-term homeless. This is for people who have recently been made homeless and are on the street because they literally have nothing. So in these Bags of Love, is the basic materials you need to survive for the first couple of weeks. You know, the blanket and this, that, and the other to get you through until you find maybe a hostel or some part-time accommodation or get back on. And there's things, different things for men than there are for women. So he runs his own charity as well. And, you know, and he's also been in hospital with COVID-19. And has, and has survived. He's back at home. He lives with his sister. His sister is a paramedic. So he's still recovering back at home. I'm glad to hear he's on the mend. But he was in hospital with it, yeah. So he's got a lot of strings to his bows. And like I said, when you speak to people like Keith Bateman and Spiros and Santilli to a degree, one of the sort of common denominators, they all have this wicked sense of humour, you know. And I think when you look at the hoax as a whole and how it all came about and how they all did this, that, and the other, you can see that sort of imprint on it, this wicked sense of humour. Because when I spoke to Keith Bateman, he told us some of the other brainstorming sessions they had, which were completely nuts. You know, some of the ideas that they came. I'll give you a little example with Keith. One of the things they made was karaoke videos. Now, in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a craze for keep fit videos. You know, you'd have Jane Fonda or whoever. So Keith came up with a crazy idea of having a keep fit video, but the actual people in it would be naked. So he had two women and a man doing exercise completely naked. Now somebody got a look of it and said, you can't release that. Not because they're naked, it's because they're not proper keep fit instructors. They're just actors you've hired from somewhere, you know, and the whatever it is they're doing is not correct. You know, you get sued for hurting somebody.
Yeah.
So Keith came up with the idea. He let out a story to one of the newspapers, and he said, I was actually overseas and I phoned my producer and I said to him, we need a new keep fit video. And he says the telephone line was so bad, he said he thought I said, we need a nude keep fit video. Which is not the, you know, is not the case. You know, Keith knew fine what they were making, and because of the newspaper article, this keep fit video of these two women and a man just not doing anything untoward. This is not pornography or anything like that. They're just doing keep fit. It sold in its thousands, and Keith made a nice tidy profit, and he was killing himself with laughing. You know, he couldn't believe his luck. So that's the kind of atmosphere out of which grew the Alien Autopsy film, because it was Keith that went on to make the first film, the tent footage. And believe it or not, Keith even made a little film of our former Prime Minister, Tony Blair, with an alien. And he's got an actor that looks pretty much like Tony Blair at a distance, you know, and there's an alien. He's never released it. He sent it to me, and it only lasted a minute or so. But it just shows you what goes through their mind. And they used to get up to all kinds of little stunts and pull, you know, practical jokes with each other and that kind of thing. And that, out of all that, grew the Alien Autopsy. That has made Santilli millions. Really has.
It's fascinating. It is an illusion. It was basically an illusion, an idea for an illusion by a magician.
And that's what Spiros calls it. He calls it the world's greatest illusion because it fools so many people, you know. And if you think about it, it's probably the world's greatest hoax. Whichever way you want to look at it, James, A, from the amount of money it made, B, from the coverage it got, whether it be on television, it was in newspapers and magazines, you know, around the world. So whichever way you want to look at it, it's probably the world's biggest hoax, you know.
One of the things that bothered me of it when I recall seeing, was it stills or a little clip of it, was the people doing the surgery, the rubber gloves didn't fit.
No,
like when you put surgical gloves on, they're tight, so you can use your fingers, the tips of your fingers, and manipulate things. The tips of the fingers on them, they were wearing gloves that were too big for them, and they kind of hung over, which is not what someone would wear.
Yeah, I mean, it's obvious also when you look at the film. Beyond the back of the room is a window, glass in it, and behind that glass is a man with a surgical mask on. Well, why would he need a surgical mask if he's actually behind glass?
On the other side of the glass, yeah.
Well, the reason he's got his surgical mask on is to hide his face. The chap behind the glass is called Gareth Watson. Gareth worked for Ray Santilli. I've interviewed Gareth. I met him several times in Ray Santilli's office. That's Gareth Watson. If you're behind a piece of glass out in another room, you wouldn't need a surgical mask. The outfits that the medics wear were actually made by Spiros. He said his mum, again, at an early age, taught him how to sew because she was quite a good seamstress herself. So he made the outfits himself. And he says, you can go to any military archive you want and you will never, ever find a hazmat suit like that because they were the only ones that were ever made, and I made them. And the reason you only have a little small eyepiece through which they can see, of course, is to hide their face. There is no reason why you should only have a small slit for your eyes. And if you look at some hazmat suits, they do indeed have, an open face, although there's a visor over it, a plastic piece. There's no reason why it had to be just a small piece. If you're doing surgery, it would be better to have a more of a view. But Spiros again went into great detail. You only at one point briefly see one of the electrical sockets on the wall. Well, of course, he's got one from that era. And he said we couldn't hire the various props we need from a museum because they would look old. We needed new ones. And another thing they did, they hired, because he'd been involved in filmmaking, he knew where to get certain props from. And what they did, they would get the props but have them all delivered to different addresses. So there was no paper trail to any one. You might find the props for, say, like the clock on the wall. That might go to one address, but nothing else went there. So there was no paper trail that went to any one particular place. It was almost like, money laundering, so they did go into great detail. It's filmed on a 16mm camera, so it is filmed in celluloid. It's not a video. It's not shot on video. It's a 16. He still has the camera, and they're pretty expensive things even now to buy. But he still has it. So they did go into a lot of detail, yes, and there you go. That's how it all came about.
If I'm going to plan a robbery in an armored car, that's the guy I'm going to call. to get this thing all planned out right to the final details, including our getaway vehicles and our costumes and disguises, because that he put a lot of thought into the minute details in that illusion. It's absolutely fantastic.
It's just the way his mind works. I've seen him doing his magic tricks, and I've seen him up close. And I even though I know him, I still have no idea how he does it. I know it's a trick, but I can't figure it out. He is a very talented magician. He's in the magic circle, member of the magic circle. But he has this wicked sense of humour, like they all do. Keith Bateman is the same. Keith's a lovely, lovely guy. And I've often said, Ray Santilli was the same. I'll give you a little story about Ray Santilli.
Yeah.
And it's not to detract or anything like that. But Ray apparently owed another businessman a fairly large sum of money. This businessman gets on a plane to fly to America, and he's in economy. And off they go. And there's a bit of a party going on up front, which is business class. And who's in business class on the same flight but Ray Santilli? So he's sat in economy thinking, that guy up there owes me a ton of money, and he's in business class. And Ray sees him and says, come on up, and invites him up front for a drink, without a care in the world. Again, there's that wicked sense of humour, and like I say, when you get to know these people and get to know the background and how they worked, and then you realise how the alien autopsy came out of all that, and it's not a surprise really. So there you go.
No, it's fascinating. The actual to have that have gone as far as it did, and to actually think there are still people out there saying, no, it's real. All the people who made it are now claiming it's fake are only doing that because they've been paid off by the deep state, the government, or whoever, which to me is fascinating in itself. Like we do as a society. With a varying belief system, and as soon as you start believing into cover-ups and all the conspiracy theories, it's almost impossible to pull something back that's out there, and you've got a group of people following it and carrying it on their shoulders as real. Mm. And then when it's proved it's not, the first thing humans do is want to blame somebody else and not question their belief and not look stupid. So it's easier for them to say, no, I am right, it's everyone else is wrong, and because they are being manipulated by the unknown deep state, or it's a conspiracy from whatever. When in actual fact, as a policeman, and probably like in most jobs, we use the KISS principle, which is keep it simple, stupid. It's like it's usually the easiest. It's usually the simple explanation is the right one. Mm-hmm. It's not a huge conspiracy. I used to, some people, I would argue, they say, well, the government does this, and especially in policing, because I worked for a federal police agency, which basically in Canada, it's like in the United States would be the FBI. Mm-hmm. Well, you guys have all these secrets, and I was interviewed once, and they said, well, what do you do when you get a report of a UFO? What is your policy? And I kind of looked at the guy and says, don't really have a policy. If you come to me and say there's a UFO and you're adamant that I have to take a report, I will take the report. Yep. And it just goes into the system as it would come under the heading of, help general public or something like that. It would almost be impossible to find in a filing system, because we don't have a category for UFO, Bigfoot, ghost, haunting, that kind of thing. It would just be assist general public. Yeah. And that's where the heading would be. And you could give me photographs and details and everything, and I would take it and file it.
Yeah, I mean,
that's it.
The same I found out here, James, when with sightings, wherever. And members of the public said I reported it to my local police station. And I contacted that particular police station, and there was no policy. It just depended on who you spoke to. I remember one incident. There was a couple that lived fairly rural, and they'd done a drawing of what they saw on the report. And the police came out and had a chat with them. Said, "Can we see your drawings?" They said, "Yeah, can you have them?" So I phoned up the police station. I said, "I believe you've got their drawings. Can I have them?" See, I come and collect them. They even had one hanging from the police station roof as a bit of a joke, But there was no official policy. It was down to the whoever was in charge of that particular police station at the time. And as we mentioned before we came on air, I'm writing a new book now, which is all about UFO landings here in the UK. And there's been several cases in this already where, people were perturbed, frightened, call it what you will, and they phoned the police. And the police actually came out and had a look around, Couldn't find anything, of course, but they did respond. And on other occasions, they didn't. So what does that tell you? It tells you there's no policy. It just depends on who you speak to, you know.
And when I would tell somebody that, they say, "Oh yeah, you probably do have a policy. You just can't tell me." It's like, it's not a conspiracy. I can't get 5 guys to agree where to go for a tea. Are you kidding? And you think I can control 1,000 people and keep them quiet? And no, honestly, when it comes down to when there is no policy, the term policy is. And I've always wanted. Here's something for the layperson. One person's policy is another person's conspiracy. Well, you take that information, but you don't do anything with it, so it's a conspiracy. No, we take that information because we're supposed to take information when people give it to us. We just have nowhere to put it.
Yeah.
Or it goes into a file system. Well, that's a conspiracy to keep it secret. No, it's just policy.
Yeah.
And unless you've actually come into work or worked for the federal government or worked for an agency where policy was when you came in there, policy existed before you showed up. And unless for some reason policy needed to change, you just did what the guy did before you, who did what the guy did before him.
Yeah.
And it's not a conspiracy. It's just what's always been done until someone changes that policy where, okay, you've reported UFO to me. Our now policy is I'll take that information and I will ask you to notify the local Air Force or notify the local military base. And then they would have to have a receptacle policy or receptive policy where they would take that information in and have somewhere to look at it. Going back to almost like Blue Book or something like that, where there is a place for that information to come in. A lot of people who see UFOs will call the military, primarily in the U.S., and they'll say, "I saw a UFO. This is what I saw. This was the date." And the person on the phone will say, "Okay, fine. Yeah, all right." And then the witness will say, "So what are you going to do about it?" Well, nothing. Or what was it? Was it a military thing? Well, the person on the phone can't tell you if it was a military exercise because policy says they're not supposed to be giving out information on military exercises and type of aircraft. You don't do that over the phone.
Yeah.
Oh no, you're this is a conspiracy. You're keeping all this stuff hidden. Well, no, it's actually because you've just phoned the flipping military. Right? It's like we don't give out information over the phone. We barely give it out to people who show up with a bunch of reporters. So it's everyone just relax. It is what it is, and we'll mumble through it. And again, forgetting that the people that you're calling and you're claiming are in a conspiracy are your neighbors. Basically their kids go to school with your kids. They go to they're going to work 9 to 5 and just want to get through the day and come home. It's not the world out to get you.
No.
I'm sure there are little groups of government agencies that are so atomized and so small where yes, it's our policy, but we're also connected to another group of people. There are a number of small organizations within a government that are responsible for receiving certain information, but never, and all that information goes up the pyramid to the top where it's all the pieces of the puzzle are put together. That is a very small group of people, but who has access to a lot of information, but it's just the way it's built.
Well, it's like before we came on air, I was talking about, I got involved with Calvin Parker. The incident that him and Charlie Hickson had in 1973 at Pascagoula in Mississippi. It's an alien abduction. And after the event, they pulled in a phone box and they phoned the local Air Force Base. And this is 1973, remember? So they phoned Keesler Air Force Base, who said, "We don't investigate UFOs anymore. Project Blue Book closed in 1969. Call your local authority," which is exactly the truth.
Yeah.
They said, phone your local authorities. So they phoned the police. They were a bit miffed that the Air Force weren't interested, but they told them the truth. So they rang the police, and the police dealt with it accordingly. But we also must remember as well, James, that the various governments around the world do keep secrets. It is correct and right that they should keep secrets, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there's any kind of conspiracy. For example, we have the Official Secrets Act, which is long out of date. And a friend of mine who used to work in a textile mill actually signed the Official Secrets Act. And I said, well, why did you have to sign the Official Secrets Act? Because part of the cloth that they made in that particular mill was used for military dress uniforms. Therefore, he had to sign the Official Secrets Act so he wouldn't give out what the military dress uniforms were made out of. They weren't made out of anything particularly secret. It's just the way that, bureaucracy works.
Yep.
And of course, sometimes they will keep a secret, not because of the content of the information that they've got, but it's through what channels it's been received in the first place, and rightly so. So, we do know that the governments do keep secrets, but we have to remember it is also their job to keep secrets at times as well, So there you go.
The Calvin Parker incident, they go through an abduction down by the river while they're fishing. They, it's a big deal, obviously, to them. So they call the Air Force, don't get anything from them, and they call the local police. Well, the local police, they start off not investigating the complaint. They think they're drunk.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the complaint. They go, okay, we got a couple of drunk guys. They're driving. We better go out and stop them. They're at the car, whatever this intersection is. They've stopped off at the phone booth, and we better go check them before they drive home. That was the actual reason the police attended. And then because these two guys are adamant and sober, they write it up as going, oh my God, these guys, this is what happened.
Well, not only did they write it up, they gave them a sobriety test to begin with.
Yeah.
And then they passed that. They escorted them into town to the sheriff's office, and they interviewed them both separately. Still didn't believe this fantastic story they were coming out with, so they put them both together in a room and left them. And there was a desk next to them, unbeknown to Calvin Parker and Charles Hickson. There was a tape recorder playing, and it was recording their conversation. The police thinking, they'll say, hey, we've fooled them, So after 5 minutes or so, they retrieved the tape. Again, Charlie and Calvin, no idea. They played the tape back, and of course they didn't do that. They were still worried about what had happened to them. I think, Calvin is almost breaking down. He was only 18 at the time. He's almost praying, I think, at one point. So it's at that point that the authorities have a change of heart and believe them. And somehow, and we still don't know how, the story got out the next day, and it made headlines around the world. And I'll tell you, how I came. I read about the story in the 1980s. It always fascinated me. As I mentioned earlier, I was Bufora's conference organizer. That's how I got Ray Santini to show the film at one of our conferences. Now, we tried to get hold of Charlie Hickson, because we knew that Charlie in the past had done a few speaking engagements and what have you, but we failed to do so. So a couple of years back, I started flying this press in 2015. A couple of years back, I got permission to republish Charlie Hickson's book that he wrote with a chap called William Mendes back in 1983. You can buy a copy of that book. They came out in a limited release, but they charge a fortune for it, So I thought, I'm not having that, and I got permission to republish it. And as a sort of an aside issue, I knew Charlie had passed away, but I thought, I'm sure Calvin's around somewhere, but no idea where. And it took me about 3 months to find him, and I finally tracked him down and spoke to him, and he was polite, but didn't say an awful lot. And all I wanted was an interview, and I thought I'll stick that in the back of the reprint of Charlie's book. So we had a couple of telephone conversations, and in the end, Calvin said, well, I thought about doing my own book. And he was still trying to fob me off. I didn't know that. But unbeknown to me, just before this, his wife Waynette said, why don't you write your own book? Calvin had been to a funeral, and there was a book of condolence, and he signed it, and a few people were sort of wink, wink, nudge, nudge. That's Calvin Parker, the alien guy. So Calvin finally decided that we'd write his book and finally tell his story in full for the first time, which he never had done. And we published that in Pascagoula, The Closest Encounter, which became an Amazon bestseller. And Calvin did some local media, one of which was a little sort of mini documentary, lasted about 8 or 9 minutes. Somebody put that on YouTube. And one of the comments on YouTube was from a lady who said, my mum and dad witnessed that same thing that night. They were on the other side of the river. What? Because where this incident happened, James, on the Pascagoula River, it's not an out-of-the-way place. It is literally at the side of the road. There's a huge, great bridge goes across the river on Highway 90, so it's not in the middle of nowhere. We already knew from Charlie's book that they had one witness in that. And so I tracked this lady down on YouTube, and she gave me her parents' phone number. They're Mr. and Mrs. Blair. And what they told us was that they were indeed on the other side of the river that night. Mr. Blair worked in the fishing industry. He was waiting for the boat to come in, and it was late. So he was having a little sleep in his car. Mrs. Blair was outside, and she said, I could see this blue light. Bearing in mind, the first things that Charlie and Calvin saw was a blue light. And she said, it was the other side of the river. She said, it looked like it was lost. It was moving around. It didn't look like it knew where it was going. And her husband saw it as well. And then the boat came in. So they're walking along this little pier. It's dark. And Mrs. Blair says, there was a huge splash in the water next to me. And she says, I looked down, and there is this grey man in the water. And she said he went under the water, and I never saw him come back up. She threw her husband's stuff onto the boat and run. She was terrified. He'd got in the boat by this time. He was a bit grumpy because the boat was so late in coming in. Now, we spoke to Mr. Blair, and initially he said, yeah, I saw the blue light. And then he took ill. And he then went on to tell us, he said, and he'd never even told his wife this. He said, I saw the humanoid, he called it. I saw the humanoid as well, Philip. It came up out of the water. He said it went back across the river. And he said, I saw the UFO take off. And sadly, Mr. Blair is now seriously ill, but we have that statement on video as well. And we were totally amazed. And then another gentleman approached Calvin at a book signing. And then, again, knocking on a little bit. And he just said to Calvin casually, I saw the thing that night. And before Calvin had a chance to say, hang on a minute, he'd gone. But somebody took a few photographs of the book signing, and there's this chap, So we put that on social media. And I had to do it 2 or 3 times. And eventually, somebody said, I know who that is. And we got his telephone number, and he was a Mr. Lewis Lee. And he said, I used to work in the shipyards, and I had a little extra job on an evening, and I was a crane operator. And again, he was on the other side of the river because there's a big shipyard there. And he said, I got into my cab, which is about 10 feet, 12 feet off the ground. And he said, you've got a great view of the river. And he said, as soon as I got in it, I could see this thing. And he said, I can't do the accent, I'm afraid. But he said, I remember what he said. He said, it's the darndest thing I ever did see. And he watched it for quite some time. Again, this blue thing. And he said, the only reason I took my eyes off it is because I had a load on the end of my crane, and my friend down below was shouting, what are you doing? I didn't want to hurt him. And he said, and when I looked back, it had gone. We also had a gentleman driving across the bridge, saw the blue light down below him. He said, at first I thought it was an aircraft coming in. I thought it was going to crash. It was so low. And he said he went to see his grandmother the next day, and she lived down by the river. He said, I didn't even mention it. And she said, you never believe what I saw last night. She saw it as well. So, I mean, there's more than that. There's just other witnesses came out of the woodwork. The Blairs especially astounded us. But when you add it all together, it adds up. Now, Calvin also tells us that when they're fishing in the river, they've got their back to the land, and they said they saw these blue lights. Calvin at first thought it was the police were going to get arrested. And he turned around with this blinding blue light. When their eyes got adjusted, there was this oval-shaped thing with two lights at the end. Cutting a long story short, it says these three creatures literally floated out of this thing. They were wrinkly skinned, they had mitten-shaped hands, they didn't walk, they literally floated across the ground. Two got hold of Charlie and one got hold of Calvin. Calvin said, I was terrified. He said, I felt this prick, this hiss, and then I just went calm. They were taken into this thing, that encounter happened, and again he got a bit frightened, and he said, I felt this other prick, and I was relaxed. Now, one of the things I asked Calvin when I first met him, have you got any photographs, documents? What he did have had all been lost in Hurricane Katrina. His house was under, I think, 20 foot of water, whatever. So everything was gone. So I started going around all the UFO groups and researchers that had been around at that time, saying, have you got anything on the Pascagoula case? I got a file from the Center for UFO Studies, which of course was set up by the late Alan Hynek. Hynek was at Pascagoula within 72 hours of it happening, speaking to Charlie and Calvin, and said it was authentic. Now, most of this file is just newspaper cutting, James. But right smack among it is a one-page typewritten document dated October the 13th, 1973. Bearing in mind, the encounter happened on October the 11th. And it's an examination of a physical examination of Charlie and Calvin. And there is no name on the bottom of this. It is typewritten, and the reason you can tell it's typewritten, because they go over the type over the 13th. I think they put the wrong dates, so they type over it. I remember I used to use a manual typewriter, did it many times myself. But in this document, it says both men, in quote, had puncture wounds. Now, Calvin had never seen this document before, had no knowledge of it, and we were amazed. It said, bearing in mind what he said, he felt these pinpricks, and he became relaxed. And he said, it doesn't tell you where these puncture wounds were. He said both men, they examined their whole body apart from their genitals, and they said both men had in inverted puncture wounds. So there you go. It's just, and then Calvin went under hypnosis with Bud Hopkins in 1993. He'd had another encounter. We also found out that Charlie went and saw Bud Hopkins twice in the 80s, went under hypnosis. To round it all off in Calvin's second book, which is Pascagoula, the Story Continues, right. Calvin was regressed by Kathleen Marden in September of last year. So the full transcripts of all of these sessions are also in the second book, plus a lot of the statements from the eyewitnesses. So it's all in there. And it's still ongoing. We never know what's going to pop up next.
That's very common too. You were saying, and in my conversation, this is funny for my listener who knows what happens sometimes. I did have an interview with Calvin Parker, and his side of the conversation never showed up. Yeah, it was fascinating. But in his new book, the story Pascagoula, the story continues. In my conversations with him, he has had like a second or confirmed a second incident since 1973. Travis Walton had a similar thing. He had his incident back in the 70s. He had another one in 2014.
Right.
So it does come around again. These contactees, whether they have knowledge of it or not, will have another visit.
Well, Calvin also had a couple of things in his childhood, as did Charlie. They're only brief, little fleeting things. But the 1993 incident, Calvin said, I'm going fishing for a couple of hours, daylight. So he said, I took some water and a sandwich with me. And I remember seeing this cloud, and this cloud opened up. It opened. And then the next thing he remembers, it's pitch black, and he's late, he's covered in muck. So he goes back to the shore. His wife had been out looking for him and left a note under his windscreen washers saying, "Where are you?" So we went back home, he's covered in this black stuff. And he just says to her, "Oh, it's oil from the boat. I had a boat problem." And it was actually a friend of his who had a little bit of interest in the UFO subject, said, "The guy you need to see is Bud Hopkins, and he's down in Florida at a conference. Let's go." So they literally drove down unannounced and approached Bud behind closed doors, and Bud hypnotized Calvin, there and then at the hotel, and thankfully tape recorded it. But unbeknown to us, Charlie had been to see Bud twice in the 1980s, and we managed to retrieve those two tapes as well, sadly, because Bud's no longer with us. And a fascinating and another fascinating account emerged. Calvin had little bits of knowledge of it, but more was released under hypnosis. And then Kathleen Marden, in September of last year, happened to be in the area. We managed to get Kathy to hypnotize Calvin, and she went through the whole 4 episodes all again. So again, the transcript is in full, is in there. So it's all in there. And Calvin signed up with a producer to hopefully look towards making all of this into a movie. Whether it'll ever happen or not, we don't know. But he's signed up with one anyway, so we're hopeful. But irrespective of that, so what's turned out as Calvin not telling his full story, a whole lot more, by doing that, a whole lot more has emerged since. And we're quietly confident there's more to come, but we don't know what.
Oh, yeah. It is. There's always more under that lid. I'm gonna have to give Calvin a call again. Actually, when I finish today, I'm gonna give him a shout and see if we can get him back on, and hopefully both sides of the interview record. Mm-hmm. And also Diane Tessman, I'm gonna give her a couple of more weeks and then give her a shout and see how she's doing. Okay. And bring her on. Please go to Philip's website, flyingdiscpress.com. Check on the number of books, including the one we were just talking about with Calvin Parker and his incident in Pascagoula. It's called Pascagoula, The Story Continues, New Evidence and New Eyewitnesses. And that's what Philip was just talking about. Philip, I want to really thank you for dropping by today. I know it's getting into the evening there in the UK, and here I'm just starting my Friday. So I want to thank you for telling me Friday turns out okay. That I don't have to look forward to the world coming to an end because you're still there.
No, I'm still there.
Yeah, and again, thank you very much for talking about your new book, the latest book, the Alien Autopsy film, Roswell Alien Autopsy, I should say, the truth behind the film that shocked the world. The revised edition, you can find it. It's actually out on Kindle. Go to Amazon.com and check it out. Actually, just go to Amazon.com and search Philip Mantel, and you'll find his series of books. Again, thank you very much for...
My pleasure, Jay. My pleasure.
Watching you while you sleep all alone.
All right, that's it. Let's roll. And hey. Let's be careful out there.
Far over the snow, under those voices, they sing as they go No!